We are live.
You know what? I'm going to let our guest introduce himself. How about that? Brian?
Oh, hi, I'm Brian Yuzna.
And we know that other guy too.
Yeah,
he's been on air a couple times.
This is Nick Benson and Brian Yuzna, and kind of one
I'm
of the.
Nick, and I'm an alcoholic. Oh wait,
Yeah.
wrong meeting. Sorry.
that was earlier. That was earlier today, buddy.
That was
Come on.
earlier.
It's actually a funny story how this episode came to be. So I want to say about 3 weeks ago, Mick came to me and said, we kind of hit a dry spell, buddy. And I said, I agree. I think it's time that we take a couple weeks off and stock up on some guests. He goes, do you have any ideas? And I said, I'd really like to talk to Brian Yuzna at some point. And he said, I think I can make that happen because Nick Benson worked with him. He's
Brian's like that mythical unicorn. You can sometimes see him, but not often.
So now I can knock off my checklist of some of the people I've talked to, and it's thank you for coming on, Brian. It's definitely, it's an awesome opportunity.
I want to say that first of all, I've worked with Screaming Mad George and Nick before on Nightmare on Elm Street 4, and they had this bizarre film in common. And I kept hearing about it, and finally, a few months ago, I
forced him to watch it.
He literally forced me to watch it in a hotel room, up in Pennsylvania. And
we were talking about Mr. Trump, I believe.
Yeah, so we were. He goes, well, I got a film that's really topical about all that, and this is what came of it. And I have to say, it is such a strange experience, but I loved it. I mean, my God, the scene that TJ hasn't even seen yet. The stuff in the house. Oh my God, it gives a new relevancy to up your ass.
I will have to say I've seen about every other movie Brian's made, horror related. So I think we can have a relative discussion.
You're in the groove.
Yes.
Yeah. So anyway, I love to meet you. I am a big fan, and by big I mean about 300 pounds. So
Fat Jesus coming at you.
Fat Jesus. and you and I are movie contemporaries. We were working together in roughly through the same period,
The 80s, 90s.
Yeah, the 80s and 90s, and the early thousands and stuff, and we've seen a lot of changes in the business, haven't we?
Well, it's gone from the early video to the post video.
Yeah. Oh. Yeah. And the stuff that you were doing, I was going to say that we were on when I was doing my films and I was working a lot for New Line Cinema, there were like 3 or 4 groups around that were intermixing around town, that were making horror films, that were trading different crews and stuff, and we were all using the same crew members one way or another, and
I feel so used.
Yes, and you were. and your group, I sort of considered it as the Stuart Gordon reenactors all the way on over to the trauma people. That was like one group, and then the Beekler, the
Full Moon guys like
Full
that.
Moon, yeah. Well, I always in my head I put Full Moon in together with Corman's stuff.
Richard Banner and all them,
and then that stuff. I was working kind of the New Line Cinema Renaissance group, and it just seems like all these groups were like interspilling in amongst each other all the time. And we were
They
using,
were all being written about by Fangoria.
yes. And I would say that Fangoria was like kind of the common thread that ran through all of us, huh?
Well, it was, in a way, it definitely was sort of like the newspaper of record or something. You know, you just wanted to get your stuff, you know, get a few photos.
Really?
Yeah.
Really, I remember that we were always passing back and forth a couple of the reporters, trying to get them to come to set. So that was, you know. So anyway, I don't know if you remember him, but Nick Benson was deep down inside of the sofa, I think.
Oh yeah.
Well, there were about a dozen or more people down in there with very rudimentary video feeds, like very rudimentary.
Yeah. That's now
that's the beauty of the shunting is it's a puppet show.
It was, you know? in so many more ways than
a puppet act.
Yeah, and it was kind of a puppet act about a puppet act.
Yeah, I guess.
and what a great comment on society. That it kind of goes along with. Did you ever see a film called Eating Raoul?
Of course, I had met Paul Bartel, and my friend Kim Deitch did the comic book of it.
Oh, great! So you know the whole concept of eating the rich. This seemed to be the answer to that. That's the rich eating back.
Well, there was a T-shirt back in the late '60s, early '70s that said "Eat the Rich."
Right.
And actually, one of the characters in Society wears it to the party, but unfortunately, he had a shirt on, and you can't read it very well.
I love the scene, and this is a spoiler, TJ, but you know, occasionally I accuse you of talking out your ass. Well, in a little bit, you're going to see what that looks like.
Oh, I saw the butthead scene.
You saw the butthead.
Oh,
yeah, I saw the butthead scene.
I mean, a friend of mine is trying to do a series based on the Blood Island, Beast of Blood movies from the early '60s, and so one of the promotions is you know these tiki mugs, you know, at the tiki bars.
Yeah,
you know what I'm talking about. You've probably seen. Maybe don't remember the Beast of Blood, but here's a mask of it. Let's see if you can see that.
Oh, that's awesome.
Remember the Beast of Blood?
That's awesome.
That's great.
Yes.
You know,
I love it.
he has his hand held up, holding up his head. Filipino stuff.
Yeah, that's
so he's got a tiki mug of the Beast of Blood. It's like a two-parter. It's downstairs. Maybe I'll go down and get it. And so the head comes off. You can have two drinks. But I thought, wow, there should be I didn't know about this whole tiki mug thing. People spend a lot of money on these different, you get every kind of tiki mug. Yeah. And I thought, oh, wow, a butthead tiki mug would be kind of cool. You know?
You're drinking out of your ass.
You're drinking out of your ass again. God damn it.
You know, these things, they cost anywhere from like 30 to like 150 or more bucks.
Oh, more sometimes, yeah.
I mean,
more if they're rare.
Incredible, you know.
Yeah.
I think the ones that he's putting out, he's only really doing it to promote so that he'll have something to take into the studios. You know, you always have to bring them a toy or something, you know, a shiny object. You know,
try to distract them.
Yeah, and so that's the kind of thing that, but they cost like $120, $130. For him, I think it cost him about half that to make it. It's expensive. But
Well,
if you're trying to get a movie made, so you got you got to put up something.
It takes every trick in the books these days, doesn't it?
So does that mean that I need to make a monkey mug now?
Yeah, that's right.
Well, I didn't realize, because he sold out, and I thought, God, that's like a little business, You got to get somebody to do it that knows what they're doing. But you think, wow, a limited edition. It's a great way to commemorate a movie.
For sure.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah. So, you've been involved in a couple of movies.
Speaking of tiki mugs, Return of the Living Dead 3 would be a good tiki mug.
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't have the rights to that one. But
Oh,
yeah, that one should have Julie should be a posable figure. She should. A classic character, And actually, there's a bunch of good characters in it.
You made the perfect love story with zombies. I'm just gonna say that.
Yeah. It's a good one. I think it's a movie that just it always suffered because it didn't have a good title.
Mm-hmm.
It was just the most awkward all time titles.
Yes.
Return of the Living Dead is already
a ready film, right?
I think Return of the Living Dead Part 3.
Yeah.
You kind of go that you can't put another label, and you can't give it another. You can't call it I remember Nightmare on Elm Street always had a title for each one. The Dream,
Dream Warrior, Dream Warriors, right?
Not that it really mattered, I guess. But I think what it was that Return of the Living Dead 2 kind of didn't work, and so then there was no real advantage. But usually it wasn't Return of Nightmare on Elm Street, Dream Warrior.
Right. If you think that it doesn't matter, I did this stupid film. I was art director, construction coordinator on a film called Electric Boogaloo, and it was it was the second
Breaking 2,
right? And the thing is nobody even remembers Breaking 1 because the second one
because of Electric Boogaloo.
Because it's called Electric Boogaloo.
That's right.
Absolutely.
In fact, Virtual Con that I was just on has a pin that says Electric Boogaloo.
Right. It follows me everywhere. I was like, wow, really? You wouldn't know about that? What the hell?
They still, today it's even more so. The thing is sometimes, Return of the Living Dead 3 was very much not like the other ones.
No.
And the only thing that Trimark, the company that made it, insisted on was that it have the trioxin gas and that it have brain eating. And other than that, they didn't care. And I got that, I cleared that up with them up front, because the second one, they had to put in, I guess it was financed by some Japanese money, and they insisted on having the same actors and even the same characters that had already died.
Yep.
So that's an awkward thing. Of course, it suffered more because the director really didn't want to make it.
Yeah.
That's the problem. He really wasn't that into it. You can tell if you ever hear the commentary by him. It's just all he's doing is saying, I didn't want to do this thing. And it kind of didn't. So it kind of, it kind of diminished the value of the next one. It diminished the next sequel down to the level that they would get me to do it. Right?
Yeah.
If they go for me, it's got to be like all the way down. It's got to be worthless by that point. And but for some reason, I don't know why I didn't want to do it. Usually I've done a lot of sequels, and I'm usually like really into trying to make it kind of work, except for a couple of that I've done where I just kind of jettisoned the whole thing. One was the Silent Night ones, and
that's right.
Return of the Living Dead, and I don't know why I didn't want to do the ironic kind of, sort of insidious humor type of thing, because I do it all the time.
Right.
Yeah. It's a natural. It's a natural
place
thing
to go.
for me. But for some reason, I remember when I was working on it, because I first worked on that project with a couple of producers, Joel Castleberg and Denitza Miner, who it turned out didn't have the rights.
Oh.
But we tried to get it going, and so I had been working on it. And believe it or not, even back then, I think this must have been 1992 or something, 91 or 2, I forget. Even then, I thought, what more can you do with a zombie movie?
Yeah.
I thought, there's been so much. What more could you do? Of course, now we're like 25 years later.
Yeah, I was gonna say.
Doing zombies. And so I had thought that what I wanted to do was a movie where the living dead would be the main character, where the zombie would be a main character, which hadn't been done. It a little bit in Day of the Dead, with the Bubba character, but in Return of the Living Dead, when they're changing the two guys, I forget their names, from the medical.
But you were the first to characterize that zombie.
Exactly, because one reason was that I thought that would turn over the structure of the story just by making you be with the one who's changing, not seeing every zombie as a threat. But also because on Bride of Reanimator, I spent the whole movie getting the bride to come alive. And it wasn't till the middle of the third act that the bride comes to life. And when I finally watched the whole movie, I went, wow, she's the best character. And she has no screen time.
Yeah.
I should have done much more with her. I was, in a way, I think I was modeling it on on Bride of Frankenstein, where the bride comes to life at the very end,
At the very end, and it's everybody's undoing, yeah.
And it was a similar thing. It was the flip, though. In Bride of Frankenstein, the Frankenstein monster loves the bride, and she thinks he's repulsive.
Right.
And in this, she wants her creator, Dan Cain, to love her, and he's disgusted by her, which is really the theme of the original Frankenstein book, because that's where I went for Bride, as I went to that original book. So when I did make the Bride, then later I thought, man, I want this to be the movie, and so that was one of the influences on having Julie be the story. She is the story, you know. You don't have to wait till the end to see her, and I think it's a real romance.
It is.
It's a real romance. I mean, it kind of works even if you took the fantastic out of it. I think the beats kind of work. It's like she could have just been a drug addict.
Yes.
Right? And her boyfriend just doesn't want to accept how depraved she's become.
Well, yes. It's great. You know, just like in Bride of Frankenstein, where, you know, Frankenstein finally learns how to speak so he can just finally say, wow, I'm fucked.
It's funny how they never let him speak after that.
Well, yeah. Well,
you know, then with Son of Frankenstein, and what was the next one? Ghost of Frankenstein, or whatever.
Right.
They just backed off and said, we're gonna.
It didn't work out well for him.
The speaking?
Yes.
No, hey, the Frankenstein monster never died.
Well, the original Frankenstein, he couldn't speak. I mean, and I don't mean that he couldn't speak.
You mean, no, you're talking about the movie now, the first movie.
Yeah, the first movie, he couldn't speak.
Spoke,
they didn't, the way that they had built they were using a plaster appliance
Mm-hmm.
over his face,
Mm-hmm.
and he couldn't have said anything if you tried.
You know, when I was working on Bride, and we had to get that script done like in 2 months before we
Right.
started pre-production, because we had money from the Japanese, and we had to shoot the first week in June.
Right.
So that, I don't know if it was a tax thing, but it was kind of like, if you shoot by the first week in June, the money's there.
Right.
And if you don't, then we've got to go back to the drawing board.
Right.
And so I worked with Woody Keith and Rick Fry, the Writers for Society, on it. And we actually started the script from, I think it was 2 months, like in February, and we started pre-production on May 1st. And we just had to come up with the story helter-skelter as we went. And so one of the things I did was I looked at the short stories, the Lovecraft short stories again, and tried to find anything we hadn't used.
Yeah.
Right.
You know, whatever was like the doodling with body parts, that's in the stories.
Right.
You know, the goop where you can, which is actually in the short story, is the logic behind the head being able to be alive.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas in Reanimator, we just kept it simple. It's just the serum. But in the stories, you have to get the goop from the lizard in South America or something, where anything can grow, and he can make all these weird body part things. And I had on every version we ever worked on, the one thing that that was always in it, besides Herbert West and Dan Kane, was the finger eye creature. Because I just had that. I just wanted to see that creature. I wanted to see that guy. So everything had to be back engineered so you could have that character, you know. But the other thing I did was look at the. I had read Frankenstein back when I was like a teenager. You know, when I read Dracula and, you know, H.G. Wells and all that stuff. You know, in my teens. And I hated Frankenstein. I thought it was unreadable. It was just terrible kind of plotting kind of story, archaic kind of language. And then when I was making Bride, I went back to it because I had the Bernie Wrightson illustrated version. Bernie Wrightson had done illustrations for the book. And it was still the same text as Mary Shelley. And then, you know, being 20 years older, all of a sudden I was like really kind of amazed by it. I wasn't put off by the style of storytelling.
Right.
And
right.
I had also wondered what could be in that book that would make an actor like Boris Karloff go through what he went through for the makeup. I understand he even had teeth pulled, so his cheeks would suck in, and you kind of go, wow, there must be something in there to make. There must be something to inspire that. Right. And then when I read the book and saw the whole, what I took from it was that whole, and the book has the bride in it, the maid, they call it.
All the way to his death up in the ice flows and the rest of that. But the book, the thing is the engineering of the book and the death and collecting the corpses and all the rest of that is such a small part of the book. And it's that movie.
Nick. Well, the movie was like, I guess it would be the first modern horror movie in the sense that it kind of created the Universal Monsters sort of created this kind of monster movie that we still go back to. I'm not saying that was the earliest thing. I think Nosferatu is still the best vampire movie ever made.
Ever.
First one,
we had this discussion a couple weeks ago.
Nobody's been able to match it. But what I thought about Mary Shelley's story was that what struck me was this idea that the creature was rejected by it wasn't Victor Frankenstein, it's Henry Frankenstein or whatever.
Right.
Like Victor's in the movie, but was rejected by Frankenstein, Dr. Frankenstein. He just thought he was an abomination. And I thought, wow, that's something we've all kind of, that's something you can feel about your parents, that your parents reject you because you're just such a fuck up or something, or you're not good enough, or you're in love with someone and they kind of think you're a putz or something. Or on a much grander existential scale, it's that humanity, God has looked at humanity and said, this stinks. I'm out of here.
This didn't work out.
And then you've got to kind of come up with your own idea of what's the value. But anyway, I thought that theme was great. I thought that was a great heart for a movie,
Nick, you got to work on Bride as well. What contributions did you have for that film?
Honestly, it was really, really early on.
Okay.
When they were just starting out, and I was getting ready to move. I was at George's studio, and it's actually interesting that Brian brought up the finger creature, because that early design for that came from me. It was a hand that I gave to George, and told him that we should do something like that, and I think he modified it into the finger creature.
Excellent. Full circle there. Say we can connect everybody. It's like that Degrees of Bacon thing for horror. Speaking of bacon, Arrow Video is releasing a 4K Tremors release here soon.
Oh wow!
Yeah, I just
pre-ordered the. I didn't realize there's been like 10 of those things.
Right? Yeah.
I just found that out.
Reading an article about it. I read some article where they listed them from worst to best.
Yeah.
There were like 9 or 10 of them, just bizarre ones, I guess it's like The Howling or I don't know.
But
I guess even Texas Chainsaw went through that, right?
Yeah, but have they gone to space yet? Because they
haven't gone to space yet. So.
Friday the 13th
is the only one that went to space.
Space Tremors.
They made it. They made it to space first.
Well, Space Tremors is actually Dune. Let's be clear. Let's be clear about where the origins are.
Yeah.
I bow before you.
100%.
That was brilliant. All right. Nice catch.
So, Brian, you got to work with Stuart Gordon on a couple projects who also adapted other H.P. Lovecraft stories. I watched Castle Freak for the first time, and I realized that was an adaptation of The Outsider. And that just blew my mind. Have you watched that film?
Yeah, well, I saw it when it came out. I didn't work on that because by that time I was in a lawsuit with old Charlie Band, and I bailed during the development of RoboJocks. I was producing RoboJocks when we developed it, but at one point I couldn't really work with Empire because they had not paid the money they were supposed to pay.
That is such a reoccurring story I hear.
Wait, Charlie Band, you're saying?
That never happened.
I just can't can't believe that.
I like to say that Charlie Band would own a studio by now if he wasn't ethically challenged. because as for my money, hey, if it was my money, he's always been like one step ahead of the exploitation market. And and that's the part of the movies I like. I like that.
Yeah,
Roger Corman. I grew up with the Corman Poe series, which is very influential on me. When I was in middle school, it's when The Pit and the Pendulum and House of Usher and all those came out. So a lot of like the opening sequence of doing the credit sequence of Reanimator was inspired by the Poe series credits where he had pour paint, and it would kind of it was like, you don't have to have a credit sequence, you only got to put the names up there, or now they just put them at the end. But I loved the idea of the credit sequence. Some of it was from that. And when in Bride of Reanimator, when Hill's head floats out in the beginning, that's basically House on Haunted Hill or any one of those William Castle movies where the heads talk to you. They were ghostly because they were superimpositions. And I thought, wow, I'm going to do it with blood in color. You know, it's just like when Hammer did Dracula.
Yeah.
It was in color. There was red blood and heaving bosoms, and it was a whole new thing. And I think that's kind of, you know, you keep going back to stuff you liked when you were a kid. The Necronomicon is really Tales of Terror, the Poe movie, except with a wraparound. I don't think any of the stories reached the level of the Black Cat, Cask of Amontillado story with Peter Lorre and Vincent Price and Tales of Terror, which I think is one of the all-time great entertainment.
But all of us old fucks remember because all these films didn't have a place to exhibit anywhere. All the films in the 30s and the 40s and the 50s, all those horror films especially, they didn't have a place to exhibit anymore, and so they were all on the in the late night.
Yeah, they were on TV. Right.
Yeah, we saw them all the time.
They had packages of they put together packages for late night TV.
Yeah,
and you'd have Dr. Goulardi or you know, whoever was the
Chiller
show host making fun of it.
Right, exactly. And the thing is that in that way that we all kind of grew up. By the time the 80s came along and we were all involved in film, we all had these really common experiences.
Wanted to do those things.
We wanted to do those things.
My favorite host was a fake one. It was Guy Caballero in SCTV. You remember that?
Yes.
And he would go, very scary.
I mean, Vampira to me was like amazing, but there was also another, a couple of other guys that, you know, were doing Channel 9 or Channel 5 or something like that. But the thing is, they gave us a commonality, and it was the only place for any of those films to be shown.
Yeah.
You know, and they were shown constantly.
Because they were old films. The 60s stuff and 70s stuff were shown in theaters, and then there were drive-ins. I saw the Herschel Gordon Lewis stuff at drive-in.
I saw
go to the drive-in and you'd see like what the 10,000 maniacs. You know?
I saw the skull in the theater, you know, with that
that's a great one.
That glowing green skull as it came in. Woo! The other one that I saw in the theater that I thought was hilarious was the brain, the one where the brain at the end is on a stand and it's chasing everybody around.
I know what you're talking about.
Without a face.
Yes.
Things without a face. There's lots of them.
Oh man!
And I think they've got a little spinal cord coming out.
Right, they got a little spinal cord. And basically, the spinal cord was the thing that went down onto the stand, and it would like be running around after everybody. That was some high quality shit back then, man. I love that stuff. And the thing is we all knew how silly it was, and still loved it. And then
I mean, I think now I know it's silly. I'm not sure that when I watched that stuff, I just thought that was the movies.
But
I just thought this is the movie, and and you had to accept the quality of the effects back then. They were very poor, and you had to accept. The only thing that you couldn't accept was it being boring.
Right.
That was the only thing. But the idea that the acting wasn't good or the story wasn't good, who knew? You know?
But how about that humorous edge that James Whale brought to Frankenstein and the Invisible Man? I mean, come on.
But those are top of the line. I mean, now you're talking real A movies, you know.
Well, yeah, but at the same time, those were also playing at the same time, like in
At
concert.
night, you're talking
night.
about the late night. Yeah,
Yeah, I'm
yeah.
talking
But
about
when I first saw the Universal horror movies, or at least the early ones, the
right,
first Frankenstein ones, etc.
right,
I saw them in junior high on TV when that first package went out, and they would
right,
show one a week or every
right.
Tuesday night. And then by the late '60s, they were on at 11 o'clock.
Yeah,
On Friday and Saturday,
right,
and they would maybe show two of them or something.
right. And then you would
And
get it with
I even remember staying up to
Black
watch
Lagoon.
watch
Oh yeah,
Plan 9 from Outer Space
Mhm.
and Monster from Green Hell, because I had read about them in Famous Monsters. So that
Well, you
was,
see,
for me, that was my link, is I'd read Famous Monsters
Yeah.
and I'd see these pictures of like the hideous sun demon.
right.
So, oh, I got to see that movie. When I finally saw it, I'm going, it's like 65 minutes, and then you get to see the monster.
You see
Well,
it,
you know,
the creature.
The thing that I'm saying is like that to me, the pinnacle of all those films came out as Mel Brooks, Bride of Frank. Mel Brooks,
I think
Young Frankenstein was literally almost played bit by bit out of all those movies, little pieces that were just.
I could almost say that the best Universal horror movies, monster movies, were that Young Frankenstein was top 4.
Right.
And actually, I put Abbott and Costello Meet the Monsters.
Oh, absolutely,
That's
absolutely.
Because I liked Abbott and Costello Meet the Mummy. I just wish they hadn't used a zip-up mummy suit.
Yeah.
Come on, you know. But I love the ones where they actually have the monsters,
Yeah.
Right. Well, yeah, and then again, by the time it got up to the 80s, you had to turn around and explain to your producer why you didn't want to show, your $35,000 monster all the time. Because, God damn it, I paid $35,000 for that. And I said, yes, but it's going to work best if you can only see it for 5 seconds.
Well, I learned early on that first of all, when I started making movies, I only wanted to make horror movies.
Right.
Or at least fantasy horror, more so than, say, sci-fi. I liked horror.
Right.
And fantasy is basically horror with a happy ending and a little higher key lighting.
Right.
But I learned with the effects, because I worked with so many people that would kind of go, oh, they go crazy over the effects. They never work. I say, of course they never work. They're called special effects. If they always work, they wouldn't be special effects.
Absolutely.
You have to invent something. It's not, of course it's not. You can't expect it to work. But of course, in production, the drive of production is to be able to quantify every stage of the production.
Absolutely.
So that the budget comes out right and it's spent on time. And of course, effects gets in the way of that. And then there ends up being, and usually the studio or the executive producers, they really don't know how they don't get how it's done, and that you just have to keep shooting until something works,
Yeah, right.
And I learned early on that the way to make rubber come to life is you just have to put some smoke, some goop, some blinking light, and it has a chance.
And a lot of chills.
Two things can work, but you can't just even our good friend Screaming Mad George, I have certainly had I've had issues with him, especially on Necronomicon. At the end of Necronomicon, I remember when the guy pulls his face off, the Omniati monk or something, And George just wanted it to be lit so you could see his work, his sculpture. And we go, you know what? Just pour a bunch of goop in there. You can't, you know, it's you can't shoot it so dry. You know?
Can't go wrong.
You've got to be careful. You've got to. I just feel like with rubber effects, rubber and puppets, which was basically, I always thought the 80s should have been called the revenge. It was the revenge of the, not the revenge, the invasion of the rubber guys. Because all those movies in the 80s, these were effects guys. You know, Nick, you lived it.
Yeah.
You'd go in the studio, everybody's wearing a black shirt with AC/DC or some metal band. The music's blasting. They're sculpting these weird monsters, and for every one of those guys, there's only two possible paths in life: either to be a rock and roll star or to make monsters for the movies. That's it. You know? And that's the culture that created those effects. You know? That was, I remember every Nightmare on Elm Street would be like, they're all competing with each other. Who got this scene? Who got that scene? What new thing were they going to do with methacellulose and foam latex?
I was the one that said, you did this and you did that and you did that. That was my job, boy. Hey, well, listen, Brian, it's been a blast having you on. I really have.
Yes, it has.
So what are you doing these days? And is there any way that we can help send money your way?
Yeah, I'll give you my bank account.
Yes, okay. Yeah, absolutely. That's totally what I meant.
No, I have all my thoughts. Hey, I'm working on a society TV series in England. We'll see. So, you never know with this stuff, right? You never know. I've got a book being published with Crossroads Press. It's called The Pope. It's about a seminary dropout who dresses up like the Pope and kills pedophile priests. It starts out as a psycho killer movie and becomes a superhero origin movie. It's got a lot to do with sort of like Dan Brown type of secret history stuff.
So a comedy, right?
It's tongue in cheek, yes. It's ironic. Let's put it that way. No, it actually was based on a script that I wrote with John Penny, which John Penny's the guy who wrote Return of the Living Dead 3.
Oh,
and
gotcha.
And so we wrote the script quite a while ago, and then he thought, we should do. It's just a script. Not, I don't know if any of you guys have ever tried to get a script made into a movie. Nobody reads the script. Nobody. They never read the script. The only people
nobody here has done anything like that.
Someone who's paid to be a reader, and then they'll give some notes. So it just doesn't happen. And so we thought, well, let's make a comic book. And so we did one issue of a 4 comic book adaptation. The art was done by Richard Rapphorst, who directed Frankenstein's Army.
Ooh.
And he also worked on, he's done a lot of concept art for me. When I lived in Europe, I spent all that time in Spain making the Fantastic Factory movies. I relocated to Barcelona and worked with a Spanish company. And then I actually ended up living I lived in a townhouse, I guess you'd call it a townhouse. It was about 200 years old in Gouda, Netherlands. That Richard Rapphorst and his wife had, and worked with him on a lot of the concept art for the Fantastic Factory movies. And I also worked with him and his partners on on worst case scenario. I don't know if you've seen the promos of worst case scenario. If you haven't, you definitely should. He's doing a graphic novel of it now. And
Oh, cool.
Frankenstein's Army came out of that because he needed something that he didn't have any partners with.
I love
And
that movie.
so he can do his weird stuff. So he's got a very straight, he's an incredible artist. So he did storyboards for me on Faust and concept art. He did concept art on Beyond Reanimator, on a lot of the movies I did, Dagon. But usually one of the problems when you're doing low budget movies is that there's not really a lot of money to throw around for developmental conceptual type stuff.
It's right.
There has to be a line item.
Yeah, that's
it
right.
has to be, so it has to be like the storyboard artist, which is always very little money. And a concept artist is just someone, for me, it's just someone that I collaborate with, that I just say, hey, what can we do? Let's try something. I would say, with Screaming Mad George on Society, the script, the original script of Society didn't have the shunting. I wanted the shunting because I didn't want to, I liked the paranoia of the movie, of the script, because it was the same kind of paranoia that I had been living for about 7 months while I worked with Dan O'Bannon late nights on a script called The Men, which was about a woman who discovers that all men are aliens. And when that fell out, I had already had this whole world of paranoia, the secret worlds and stuff. And so when I saw the script that Rick Fry and Woody Keith had, I went, wow, this is that same paranoia, and it has this weird Beverly Hills class thing and all that. But I thought, if I'm going to direct a movie, you direct a movie, you may never get another chance,
Right.
Usually I had a French distributor that used to tell me, most first-time directors make 2 movies in one with their first movie. Their first movie and their last movie. And I had the rights I owned Reanimator because I paid for it. Mm-hmm. I had the rights to the sequel. So I went to my friend, Paul White and Woody Keith, who had started a company called Wild Street Pictures. And I said, listen, you can do the sequel to Reanimator, but I'm going to direct it. And it has to be a 2-picture deal. I got to do 2 movies. And the second one will be Bride of Reanimator, because I figured I've never taken a film class in my life. I have believe me, I didn't even I think I made Reanimator when I was 35. I just came to LA and said, I'm going to make movies. I had no preparation, in the world to make movies. So I thought I only learned because I was the producer on Reanimator. I hired everybody. So I just watched what they did. And then when I decided I'm going to try to direct, I thought, wow, most people really fail on their first movie. You could really screw it up. So I want to make sure I get a second chance. So I'll do, because I knew they would do Bride of Reanimator no matter what. But with Society, I thought that, if I'm going to do a movie, I sure in hell is going to put some fucking effects in it, and I want these effects to be stuff I haven't seen before. And I had always I used to have this nightmare about flesh melding and stuff. And I thought, that's what I'd like to see, is flesh melding together. And so then I just tried to back engineer that idea with Woody Keith and Rick Fry to come up with some concept that would make that possible. And Screaming Mad George had been proposed to me by the ultimate financers of the movies, who were Japanese, and as we all know, George is a Japanese artist. And when I met him, he had all this surrealistic stuff. I've always been a huge fan of surrealism and expressionism in art. Even From Beyond, the first posters that we made were based on a Dali painting. And all of a sudden, we started just looking at Dali and saying, oh, let's put this image in it, this image. And if you look at the whole shunting, it's actually based on the Dali painting. You know, the big leg. It's from the great.
It
I actually remember,
really,
Brian. I remember you coming and George showing you that mask that he had done with the hand that was pulling out. Yeah, I remember that. That was pretty inspiring for that. And then George's paintings also. I mean, they were just fantastic.
George, you know, I worked so much with George. He was my number one guy to collaborate with on with effects, because George was not. He was so much less. I in no way am diminishing the value of a technician. But he was a real artist. I mean, to a fault,
he's a visionary.
He just had to do his own stuff. He's not the guy you go to. He's not the guy you go to get a head cut off. Go to KND or something. Go to somebody who can. There's tons of gags that you do, you know, that can be done really great. George is not the guy that's going to do that, because he doesn't stop inventing. So whatever he does, it's not going to be. I would never give him ordinary stuff to do in effects. I would give it to somebody who really wants to do something with that. With George, you want something conceptually, you know, that's pushing the boundaries conceptually, that really adds something to the movie. And so that's usually, you know, that's where I would go with George. For example, with Bride of Reanimator, why give George a reanimated corpse makeup? There's so many people who will do it with incredible enthusiasm and imagination, but George is going to want to do something. I think that, you know, you see George when you see that character that turns backwards and forwards.
Yep. Right.
This is weird stuff. And one of the things we talked about on Reanimator, we didn't get a chance to do it because you just don't have time. But I wanted the shunting to be a simulacrum of something else. You know, a simulacrum is when you see a face in the clouds or something. You know, when you see things in other things, or you change the lighting, or you know, you see these optical effect simulacrums where a vase is really two people kissing, or the famous one is the woman at her vanity, and it's a big mirror, and it's actually a skull if you look at it a certain way.
So
that kind of stuff I feel, is where horror is. It's this idea that it's kind of like if you go into an old dark house by yourself at night, things are going to look, you'll project project
your
something.
projection.
You'll be out, the world will start being how you feel. And which is also why I like expressionism, because in expressionism and the movies of the 20s that used expressionistic sets, the idea is that you don't put what a camera would catch out. I mean, don't put a rendering of, you know, quotidian life. You show the world as the character feels. Right. You know, that feeling is what you're trying to get across, and that's what expressionism, as I understand it, is. And the simulacra is a further sense of that. If somebody goes crazy, they'll see faces everywhere. I think in the movie The Haunting, where you never see a ghost, you do see that door and the paint pattern in the door. It starts being very creepy when you're getting scared. You start seeing things in it. So we worked on that on almost every movie I did with him. Certainly in Society I think Society is his. We didn't do the simulacrum, but I think Society was the only movie that George has ever worked on that provided him with an arena or a stage, a story where he could really do his thing, because the logic of it is so out there, you know. It's so out there, and anything George, you know, it fit totally with George. And unfortunately, he's never been able to find another project that that gave him
That kind
another
of
step on that
Yeah.
journey.
Right.
But a lot of creative people, in my experience, find that to be the case in their careers or their lives, that it's just like an actor. You can be a great actor, but if you don't have the part, it doesn't
Yeah.
matter, you know? And
Yeah.
I think a lot of, you know, when you're working in the movies, and artists who work in the movies, effects artists, puppeteers, you're only as good as what they give you in the script. And it's rare that you can have any influence on that story. Whereas with George, I could take almost, I felt so comfortable with his aesthetic that I could take almost any idea, any visual idea he had, and try to give it a place, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that was great for him. But even on movies like Progeny that he worked on, we tried to do these simulacrums of like the custom guys and the aliens matching. I mean, I was always trying to, and I know he believes in that, trying to find a way to see an image and get two ways of interpreting it.
Yeah.
on a subconscious level, not on a logical level. And I think that's what, like I say, I think that's what madness is about. I think that fear, you get that. And I think that if you could really capture that outside of a static image, right? If it could move, then you're in a world where you could really throw the viewer off base and almost have two levels of reality going on at once, which would I think be a very entertaining and impactful kind of horror movie.
I agree.
Well, you know, I've always said that that horror is the thing that you don't see out of the corner of your eye. And with that, we're going to have to say that we're all done here.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Brian. Thank you, Nick.
So that was definitely
Thanks a
something
lot.
about society. So, guys, thank you for listening to another episode of the Rabbit Hole Podcast. Friendly reminder that you can listen to the audio-only version of this on projectlouder.net, your source for pop culture, and so much more. So this is your host with the motherfucking most, TJ Bowser. Thank you, Nick Benson. Thank you, Brian Yuzna, for joining us. Mick, I'll see you next week. And to all you listeners,
bye-bye.